let's talk preferences. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I want to talk about men and women and their preferences in dating. I'm primarily going to be focusing on like the heterosexual perspective here because that's my wheelhouse, but I'm sure some of these things can probably be applied to other relationships as well. But one of the things that I keep hearing so much online is men complaining, I would say whining, about how they're not allowed to have preferences. I hear a lot of men online that are kind of complaining like, well, women can have this like long list of preferences, but men aren't allowed to have any preferences, or men get shamed for having preferences or something like that. I actually have a video about women and setting their standards and having certain standards and why it is so incredibly important for women to have high standards. I highly recommend that you watch that video because I dive into this topic when it comes to women a lot more, and how I really do encourage women to have very high standards, but also to be careful of not picking your standards from just an ego place and actually picking your standards from a soul alignment place, making sure you're actually aiming for the right thing that you want. Like not just aiming for a man with money, but aiming for a man who has the desire to be a provider. Not just aiming for a guy who's tall, but a man who actually can protect you. I also have some videos about like dating ego versus soul and determining whether or not your standards are actually coming from ego or coming from soul. Like I have a lot of videos about that, so I'm not going to dive into that too much in this video, but I highly recommend you check out those videos because it dives into these topics much deeper. The argument that I hear is that women have this like long list of standards. Most women do have quite a long list of standards when it comes to picking a partner. And that men use the argument that like they don't have that many standards when it comes to picking a partner, that they're like, we just want a woman who's nice to us. Okay, let's be real. That's not really true. Women need to have a lot of standards. We do. Like it's literally part of a woman's role here on this planet to select which men get to carry on their genetics to a new generation. And I talk about this much more in my fuller video about women's standards, but it's so important for women to have those high standards. Women are more vulnerable in sexual situations. Women hold the risk of pregnancy. Women determine who they're going to raise children with. I actually believe that women need to be more selective over who they share their bodies with because they're literally determining who they have the potential to create a baby with. Women need to have those high standards. Are women always choosing standards from a healthy soul-aligned place, or are they choosing them from ego? That varies. If you're a woman and you've got a lot of really like superficial, shallow things on your list of things you want in a partner, you might want to look into that. But for the most part, when women have a lot of these standards, it's from a place of really wanting to pick a good partner in order to, because as a woman, if you are going to be the feminine role, if you're going to submit to a man, you need to make sure that his leadership is trustable in order to submit to him. So I think women need to have higher standards. I think they need to have better standards, maybe smarter standards. However, they do still need to have higher standards. When we talk about men and can they have preferences and can they have standards? Of course they can. Like everyone can. Like everyone's allowed to do that, right? That said, if we're talking about masculine and feminine dynamics and we're assuming that the man is in the masculine and the woman is in the feminine, the masculine is the one who pursues the feminine. The masculine is the one who, he's the hunter. He's the one out for the chase, right? So as a man, you choose who you pursue. Like you make the decision as to who you pursue and who you don't pursue. As the feminine, you're the one that has to have the standards in place to say, this is who I'm going to accept and this is what I'm going to accept, because you as the feminine are the receptive energy. So for the masculine, your preference is simply who you choose to pursue and when you choose to not pursue them. And if you go into a situation, maybe you have like a physical attraction to a woman, like a woman aligns with what you want physically, so you pursue her, but then you realize she has maybe a personality trait or a characteristic or something that's a deal breaker for you. You just don't pursue her anymore. Like hopefully you end things like an adult if this is a relationship, or you just don't pursue her anymore. And like that's the way that it works. It's really not that complicated. So everybody's got their standards, everybody has their preferences. The idea that men are like, we just want a woman who's nice to us, that's not true. Let's be real. Because there's a lot of women in the world who would be very nice to a man that men are not choosing because of other factors, right? If you really dive into it, most men have more standards than what they're actually admitting to. Women are much more open about their standards. They're much more open about, these are the things that I want in a partner. I think there's a lot of men that want to like play the chill, like simplistic, like, oh, I don't really want that much, like women are asking for too much, when in reality, The men have maybe not as long a list, but they have a pretty long list of preferences that they have. They just aren't as open about it, right? Like they aren't as detailed. Let's be real. Women tend to make things more complex and add a lot more detail to things, whereas men tend to be more simplistic. That's just how masculine and feminine works, right? So for men, you may have a very simple list, but you really have like the same number of preferences, but women are breaking them down in much more detail, and men have a more like more general statements, so it looks like they have less. I also think that we have to acknowledge, if you're a man and you're like whining about like, oh, I'm not allowed to have preferences, who's not letting you have preferences? I get, you'll be labeled as misogynistic. Okay, maybe someone might label you as misogynistic. Why does that concern you? Because this is a big lesson for me that I had to learn, so I'm going to impart this on to people. You can only be offended by an insult if you actually believe it within yourself. Right? Like if someone comes to me and tells me I'm not intelligent, I get that comment sometimes. I know I'm intelligent. I don't care. You can tell me I'm not intelligent. It doesn't affect me. Whereas you could give me another insult of something that I actually, like an insecurity of mine, and I'm going to be offended by that because I kind of believe that within myself. Like there's a part of me that doesn't want to believe that about myself, but I actually do believe that about myself. You can only really be offended or fear an insult that you really believe within yourself. So if you're afraid of someone calling you misogynist, if you know you're not a misogynist, like if you know that what your preferences are real legitimate preferences that you should have and you feel like you own them, then someone calling you misogynist is not going to affect you, because it just doesn't matter if you're a misogynist or not if you don't actually believe that you are. I also think too that most women, no matter how specific their preferences are, most women will bend for the right guy. Like I don't think I've ever met a woman who had a certain height preference, and I've met a lot of women who had very specific height preferences. I've never met a single woman that actually held to that height preference. I've never met a woman that didn't like meet a guy who was great in every other area but was like, nope, I'm not going to be with him because he's not tall enough. I'm not saying that those women don't exist. I've never met a woman who did that. Most women will say, yeah, I want a guy who's like 6'4" or whatever, but then if they meet a guy who's like 6 feet tall and he's a great man, she's gonna date him. You know what I mean? There's a lot of women that will have these specific preferences, but then they don't necessarily hold themselves to them if they meet someone who they really connect with. And hey, sometimes women do bend on the wrong preferences and they give guys a chance that they shouldn't give a chance because they're not paying attention to things that are really important. But I do think that most women are not going to hold themselves to certain standards. Like, I don't know any woman who would date a guy just because he's tall and didn't have anything else going for him. So, like, the idea that women are so obsessed with height, I actually think men think women are more obsessed with height than women actually are. Like, women, yeah, women do like guys who are taller. But most women are not going to hold themselves to that if a man is great in every other area. And they're also not going to date a man just because he's tall, because if he doesn't have anything else to offer, then what good is that height gonna do you? And I think if a woman is literally just focused on that and is only dating men because of their height, she's pretty shallow. I would advise men out there, if a woman is doing that, you probably don't want her anyway. Whereas I think there's a lot of guys who may say they don't have a preference, like she just has to be nice to me, but then it's also like when they meet a woman, it's like, oh, well, she's not a certain height, she's not a certain weight, she's not a certain size, she doesn't have a certain hair color, she doesn't have a, like, they get much more particular about a woman once they meet. It's like, oh, she's nice to me, but oh, but does she have this, but she have that, and he starts comparing her to other people. Not every man does that. I'm not saying every man does that, but I think then men are more general and then they get more specific, whereas women get very specific and then they get more general. Just the difference between men and women when it comes to mating strategies. I've also noticed too, and again, I talk to a lot of women, so I've noticed a pattern with women. And I'm not saying this is universal. I've never heard a woman shame a man for not being her preference. And I'm not saying that women don't do this. Like, there might be women out there who do this. But when I hear a woman say she wants a man who's like at least 6'4", I don't ever hear her say, well, because men who are 5'10" ain't shit. Or, you know, how dare he be 5'10". She may just not date a man who's 5'10", but I don't hear women who are basically like, well, yeah, oh, he's only 6 feet tall, well, screw him. I don't hear women say that, and I hear a lot. And I'm not saying that there aren't women out there who do, maybe some do, but it's not a common thing. Whereas what I hear, and again, I don't want to assume that all men do this, but I hear this online a lot. So it might just be like your you know, the sort of alpha male podcasts who want to be shocking or things like that or whatever, but I hear a lot of men, when they say they have a certain preference, they shit on women who aren't that preference, right? Like if they have a certain preference for age, it becomes like, well, once a woman's 25, after 25 she ain't shit, or like after 25 she's no good, or after 25 she's worthless, or something like that. Like a woman's only a value, she's like between 18 and 22. There's that shame and judgment around the preference. Whereas with women, it's just a preference. It's just who they're gonna date and who they're not gonna date. With men, it's like they have to insult everybody who's outside of their preference. It's almost like, oh, how dare this woman that is not my sexual preference as far as appeal or something, like she doesn't have the ideal butt that I'm looking for, so like how dare this woman be in a bikini where you can see her butt, but her butt is not the butt that I'm attracted to. Like how dare a woman not be what it is that I'm looking for. I'm not saying quality men do this. I actually think that any man who's doing that is not a quality man. That's not like a high value man that's going to do something like that. However, I hear that a lot online. And again, it's not coming from guys who anyone should really be listening to, but it is coming from a lot of guys who then whine that like, well, why aren't they allowed to have preferences? And it's like, well, you can date whoever you want. You can choose to pursue whoever it is that you want. And it's that woman's choice whether or not she's open to you pursuing her or not. But at the end of the day, shaming anybody who isn't your preference is not a good thing. And I don't think women should be doing that either. I don't see that happening a lot with women. I see that happening a lot with men. I hear a lot of men, and it's the type of men that complain that men can't have preferences. Again, they kind of play the victim, like, oh, we can't have preferences because we're called misogynistic or whatever. And I do think that a lot of these guys are trying to stir things up. I think they're playing the victim. I think a lot of men follow them and they kind of convince men that they're the victims of this being called misogynistic or not being allowed to have preferences. A lot of these preferences that these men claim to have, they speak as if they're universal for all men. I rarely ever hear women say something like, well, women will only date a man over 6 feet tall. Or like women will only date a man over 6'4", or women will only date a man who makes over 500K, or like women will only, they'll say that they have that preference. Whereas a lot of times you hear with men, and again, I don't think this is all men that do this. I think there's a select group of very loud men with a lot of time on their hands that do this, where they'll say things like, well, no man wants a woman who weighs over this amount, or no man wants a woman who, you know, has this body type, or no man wants a woman who is over this age. You can say that's what you want, and that's fine. It's kind of an asshole thing to say that no man wants a woman that is like that, because as women, we're not speaking for all women. So as a man, if you start speaking for all men, you could see where women would kind of get insulted, where like you're literally telling a woman that no man is ever gonna want her. It's different than a woman saying, I don't want a man like that, right? Like it's a different thing. So I think sometimes with some of these guys, when they start touting their preferences, I think some of it is being aware of like, how are you wording it? Are you actually trying to tell women that no man is gonna want them? Or are you just trying to say, hey, I have a certain preference and this is what my preference is? They're two different energies, and I think that's something that people need to be mindful of. Again, I don't think this is all men who are doing this. I just think that there is a select group of very loud men, particularly ones on a lot of these like alpha male podcasts and stuff, that they kind of incite this in a lot of the men who spend their time sitting around and listening to them, and they're kind of inciting this kind of victimhood in men. I think there's a lot of men out there who are kind of being told that they're the victims of not being able to have preferences, that they're the victims of being called misogynistic if they prefer a certain woman over another woman. When in reality, it's like, you're not really. I mean, as a man, you can choose to date who you want to date. Like, it's on you. If you're gonna go around and scream that any woman who isn't what you want is you know, not a value and no man's gonna want her, you are gonna come across seeming like kind of a jerk, right? I mean, of course you are. I would also note, and I've mentioned this in a lot of other videos, and men love to argue with me about this, but I have never been proven wrong. Never, ever, ever have I been proven wrong. I wish this wasn't true about men, but it is. The type of woman that a man shames or criticizes or complains about or something is the type of woman he's actually attracted to, is what it is. Because for a man, where his attention goes is what he's attracted to. So if a man is spending all of his time complaining about like an angry feminist, he probably actually wants to date the angry feminist. I wish it wasn't true. No, and I'm not at all saying that all men want angry, man-hating feminists. I'm not saying that. But if you as a man are complaining about them all the time, it's because they have your attention. Why do they have your attention? Probably because there's an attraction there. Whether or not you choose to do anything about it is on you. Like, I just think you should look at that for a second. If you as a man are spending your time and energy criticizing overweight women, why? Just don't date an overweight woman. If you don't want to date somebody who's overweight, don't date somebody who's overweight. There's plenty of people in the world who aren't overweight. It's the anger and the criticism in someone not being your preference is actually kind of giving away what your actual preference is, because it's where your attention is. Something you need to think about. But it's really manipulative, because it's that idea of like the guy pulling the girl's hair on the playground to get her attention. That's not what a grown adult man is gonna do. It's important if you as a man are finding yourself doing that, like you're finding yourself hating and shaming women online, you might want to look within yourself. Because again, you can still have a preference. Like, no one's saying you can't have a preference. If you're sitting around shaming the women who you don't prefer, you probably would be better off putting your energy in actually pursuing the women who you do prefer. And if those women don't want you, like if the women that you do prefer are not drawn to you, then work on becoming the man that a woman who you do want does want. It's the same advice I would give to women, right? It's the same advice I would give to a woman. If you as a woman are, you know, spending your time, if you're online criticizing men who are not your preference, stop taking that energy and put it towards actually becoming the woman that a man that you do want would be attracted to. Like, it's instead of focusing so much on the negative, instead of focusing so much on the victimhood or on the criticism and shaming or, you know, things like that, focus on yourself. Focus on becoming a better person. Again, I would give this advice to men or women. What I think a lot of men, they may know this, but they don't necessarily understand this about women. Our society really tries to tear women down. I know that men think that women have it easy today. Women don't have it easy today. It's never been easy. Granted, women have more opportunities now than they ever have before, but women don't have it easy. Our entire economy is based on women's insecurities. It is. We have billion-dollar industries that are only surviving because of women's insecurities. Because we've structured our entire media society around making women feel bad about themselves, so they will buy products, so they will invest money, so they will do things that actually harm their health, so they'll be in the medical industry. Like, they're literally, our economy is thriving on women's insecurities. And I know that, you know, there's the whole body positivity thing. A lot of people think they're promoting obesity. I have a whole video where I talk about that aspect of things, so I'm not going to dive into that here. That's actually making the problem worse. It's not making it better. I know a lot of people are going to want to argue about that. I have a video where I go into that in much more depth, but our entire society is convincing women that they're not good enough. I do agree that the media, advertising and things like that are starting to target men in that same way. So I do understand that there's a lot of men who are suffering from a lot of body image issues and a lot of self-esteem issues and things like that, because they are being targeted more now than they were before, because I think there's a lot of industries who are seeing men as an untapped market, of like starting to realize they can tap into men's insecurities and make money off of that. So I do agree, men are being manipulated in that same way now. However, that isn't the way advertising used to be. That's sort of a newer phenomenon. The deep insecurities and manipulation from women is so ingrained in us because it's been going on for so long and so deeply. There's a lot of women who are waking up to that. There's a lot of men who are waking up to that as well. But I do think that one thing I would like to get across to men watching this video, as a man, when you criticize a woman, you have to also understand that she has decades and generations of the media manipulating her into thinking that she's not good enough behind her. So any little criticism is going to it's gonna be sensitive. Like, she's gonna feel a need to defend herself. She's gonna feel a need to fight back, because our insecurities as women run so incredibly deep. And I'm not trying to take away from men's insecurities and the things that men have been going through. However, those insults cut a lot deeper than I think a lot of men know. So when men do throw out these preferences, and especially if they're throwing them out in a way of, well, yeah, no man is going to want a woman that's over this age, or no man wants a woman that is this weight, or something like that. You have to understand the generational trauma that's happened, the decades of manipulation, of women being told that they're not good enough, and how painful that is on a woman. I'm not saying that women insulting men is not painful. It is. It's a different level of pain, and I think it's something to be somewhat aware of. So at the end of the day, are men allowed to have preferences? Yes, of course you are. You can absolutely, we all have preferences. Every single person on the planet has a preference. Your way of expressing that preference, ideally, is just in who you choose to pursue. You choose to pursue a woman who is the preference that you want, or you choose not to pursue a woman who isn't your preference. If you're getting to know a woman and you realize that what she has is a characteristic or a trait or something that is just a deal breaker for you, then you don't pursue her anymore. I mean, that's what getting to know each other in a relationship is. I would also advise women in the same way to, you know, if you are a woman out there and you are criticizing men who are not your preference, or you're treating men like shit, you probably shouldn't do that. That's not a very good thing to do. I think the world would be better if we were just all kinder to each other in general. But at the end of the day, women need to have a certain level of standards and preferences. If you are a woman and you do have standards and preferences, I do think it's also important to take a look at what those preferences are and make sure that you're actually looking at the overall man, and that you are actually looking at the characteristics that are truly what you want, and not just the shallow, superficial characteristics that you think that you want. A lot of what we think that we want, or what we get programmed into being told that we want, is what society is telling us. And that's with men and women. I think there's a lot of society that tells women, like, hey, if he's tall, he's gonna protect you. When in fact, there are men out there who are tall that can't even protect themselves, let alone you. There's a lot of men that get conditioned through things like porn and just general in the media and stuff, that like a woman with a certain look or a certain image is, I mean, men love to use the argument that they're looking for fertility, but like a lot of the characteristics that men actually are drawn to in their society today are actually things that inhibit a woman's fertility. If a woman has breast implants, probably screwing up her body and affecting her fertility. If a woman's on birth control, which many women are, she's not ovulating. So newsflash, she's not fertile in that moment. A lot of men who are attracted to women with incredibly low body fat, if those women don't have a natural hormone cycle, which most women are gonna lose their cycle if they get to too low a body fat count, or they're burning themselves out with exercise or things like that, she's not fertile in that moment. So I think there's a lot of men out there who kind of have these false associations with things that represent fertility are actually things that are inhibiting a woman's fertility. That's media manipulation. A lot of the film breakdowns I do, I talk a lot about how women get manipulated into believing that certain men are going to be better for them than others. You know, women have been manipulated by Disney and a lot of the Lifetime Hallmark movies and whatever, like all these movies, and men get manipulated through a lot of things like porn and things like that. A lot of us are not really taking the time to look at what we actually want in a partner. And that's what I invite people to do, both men and women, is to really look at what you truly want in a partner and then become the person who is a match for that person. And that goes for men or women. And as a man, you become the match for the woman that you truly want. Pursue the woman that you truly want. And as a woman, if you become the match for the man who is who you truly want, be able to be open and receptive to when he does pursue you. And honestly, I think that's gonna heal so many things. I think it's just gonna heal so many things. We're just gonna have better, stronger relationships in the long run. And that's what I want for everybody, is just have better, stronger relationships and not have, you know, women being sort of like angry and aggressive in their wounded masculine all the time, and men being in this sort of like victimhood place in this wounded feminine energy, and just really everybody just like healing and just healing these energies and really coming together and being our natural core energies. And that's just what I hope for everybody. So I hope this video was helpful. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you are a woman who wants to connect with her feminine energy, I have online courses, details in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. If you have any comments or thoughts on this topic, I always enjoy a respectful discussion. So leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.